I've got a question for us. How does life begin? How is life created? This is a question that has been of interest in the scientific community for many years. It's captured the attention of biology, of physics, of chemistry, of astronomy, of cosmology, and of all of the ways that different sciences talk to each other, all trying to answer the question, how does life begin? Where does it come from? At least life on Earth. So what does science know? Well, the science can measure things. So it's pretty well measured the earliest evidence of life on Earth. And it may go back as many as 4 billion years or more. There are fossils in sea vents where there was preservation of early forms of life, not conscious human animal life, but little microscopic bacteria things. And they know what was necessary for life. We need water. I mean, all this excitement about Mars now is there's some evidence that perhaps Mars had water and may still have it. So the excitement is, could there be life on Mars that we haven't detected yet? So water is necessary for life, but also the elements that water would dissolve and mix are necessary for life. So chemicals, substances, and that can become molecules. But also the molecules have to come together in proteins because life, as we know it, involves proteins. It involves cells that have membranes around them. So you need that for life. Life is getting pretty complicated, even simple life. And then if you have all those ingredients in a test tube, you still need something to give all these elements the instructions to form themselves into life that self-replicates and that can survive the conditions it finds. And science has been able to do pretty much everything except for that. They can sort of, maybe if you start with existing molecules, create some kind of RNA thing. But so far it has eluded science to actually make life happen from a bunch of elements or physical forces. So when we ask that question, where does life come from and how does it begin? We may have to look at a different form of storytelling than the stories of science to date. And that would be, for us religious people, the stories in our religious traditions. And we have just heard 3 different stories about the creation or the recreation of life. The first one from our Jewish roots, from the first book of the Bible, Genesis. We have another account of creation where life comes from earth that is already in existence, dead earth. This is kind of almost a nod to the science that in order to have life, you have to have substance. So in the Genesis story in chapter 2, we have God created the earth and it was all there, but there wasn't any water yet. There wasn't any life and there were no people to do anything with the earth or with the water. So then some water shows up, streams or mists arise and water the earth, but there's still no human life or conscious life. So God in this story, and it's a beautiful, colorful story, it's like God starts making mud pies with the earth and the mist of the waters and mixes them together and makes something shaped maybe like a person, but it still doesn't have life. So something else is needed and God provides that, a breath. God breathes into the mud pie, the human-shaped mud pie, Hadam, life. And then there's life. So the biblical story from the beginning is, in order to have life, you need at least 2 things. You need the raw materials, the physical elements, and you need breath, God's spirit. And here's something to know that's kind of interesting. that Hebrew has two words for spirit or breath or wind, ruach and neshama. And they both mean the same thing. They can mean wind or breath or spirit, whether it's ruach or neshama. And in this first story, the word for breath that enlivens is ruach, the Spirit of God that in the earlier stories of Genesis is blowing on the water like a wind on the sea. But the next story from Ezekiel, that great story of the Valley of Dry Bones, I mean, it really should be a movie, and I'm sure it actually has been a movie, where you have Ezekiel, the prophet of exile, who is a refugee with most of the leaders of the Hebrew people, taken from Jerusalem by the invading Babylonians in exile, suffering with the people, longing to get back to the home, to the place where their seat of worship and their God lives. After many years of Ezekiel explaining to the people why they had this happen to them and that they had consequences for their earlier lack of faith and wrong actions, unrighteous behavior, that both Israel and the nations that conquered Israel were going to endure a period of God's judgment, karma, consequences, exile, suffering, loss. But the time was coming, and this is the vision he had of the Valley of Dry Bones, when God would breathe new life into the dead people with the broken hearts, suffering the loss of life that they had known. And this great vision was God transporting Ezekiel to a valley, a battlefield, and it's full of bones, very dry bones. We have that detail, really, really dead, no life, not even water. And God posing the question to the prophet, can these bones live? Ezekiel is a very smart prophet, because when God asked him, how does life begin out of dead bones? Ezekiel doesn't say, well, let me check my physics textbook. He says, I don't know, God, but you know, so tell me. So God breathed into the dead bones as they reassemble themselves, molecule upon molecule, sinew on bone and flesh on sinew. And you have a thing that looks like a person, but it's not alive until the neshama, the breath of God, is blown into the nostrils, into the face of this reassembled skeleton that now has flesh on it. And neshama in Hebrew not only means breath, it means blast of breath. So it was like a puff. It wasn't just, let me breathe gently into your nostrils, O dead bones. It was, wake up, be alive, take my spirit, my force, my breath, my motivating wind, and get going again, Israel. That's a pretty cool story. And so when Jesus was sending out his disciples after his death and the loss they went through and the suffering and the fear and what's our future going to be like, and when he came back to them and commissioned them to go out and spread the gospel of the kingdom of heaven, of the new life that is possible, he didn't just send them, he blew on them. He reenacted this ancient, powerful ritual of giving them his spirit. Yes, there was a laying on of hands. That's one way we pass on the spirit. But Jesus blew in their faces. I send my spirit on you to go with you. So go. He sent, that means go, get going. Now, what does that have to do with us and the grace of amazing inspiration? Well, you know that word inspiration, it comes from what? Breathing. We fill ourselves with breath. And we know that when we can no longer breathe as physical beings, we're dead, right? We have breathed our last earthly breath. So the very act of breathing is to take in life force that we have been given to animate our lives. And it's healthy to breathe. There's lots of wellness programs about improve your breathing. So we know it's good to be inspired physically. But symbolically, a lot of us are less than inspired, right? That means two things, not just filled with breath, but filled with life force, filled with energy, filled with the fire of the Holy Spirit. And when Jesus brings the Holy Spirit as armful like Santa Claus to the church, armload of gifts and fruits of the Spirit, the Spirit does many things. It inspires us. It helps us remember the teachings. It's our advocate. It's our leader. And it blows us forward. It pushes us. And that's the aspect of the Spirit that I want to focus on today. Because when the Spirit first came on Jesus, remember in his baptism, the dove came from heaven. The first thing the Spirit did was send Jesus, drove him, blew him into the desert, where he contemplated for 40 days and 40 nights and wrestled with his demons. What does it mean to be alive? Be a beloved child of God, filled with God's Spirit, with a mission. And he came out of that time of fasting and prayer, filled with that power. He took it in. And he did stuff that changed human history. You know that. And here we are, the recipients, the inheritors of that Spirit and its gifts. So how has it moved us? Each of you will have your own answer to that question of the week. But let me tell you about a guy I learned about recently. He was born in Virginia. He was Catholic. He was the one that was supposed to study for priesthood, but he says he wasn't a very good student. He flunked a lot of things, but somehow he got through seminary. He managed to get himself ordained. He just about managed to get himself fired from his first parish priest because he says, I wasn't very good at it. So they demoted him to curate, to the little backwater Virginia parish where he couldn't do too much harm. And he started to get to know the people, and he started to find out what their problems and concerns were. And he realized, I really care about these people. I want to help them. So how can I help them? And he started to talk with them about their problems and how they might solve them. And he realized, I've got a gift for organizing people, for focusing on, here's something we need to put our attention on and we need to deal with. Who's going to help? And he realized he doesn't know much, but he knows how to organize. And he believes that he got the Holy Spirit in his baptism and ordination. And his Holy Spirit, he's going to trust it. He says, it's going to help me do what I'm called to do. So if the Holy Spirit is blowing through my life, I better put up my sail so I can catch that Spirit, because I don't know what to do. But I know I'm supposed to do something, and I've got some gifts. And from that moment on, Bill Swing began to lead a very impactful life. He got noticed. He went up the church hierarchy. He became a bishop. He became the bishop of San Francisco, that whole part of California. And he was bishop when the United Nations was celebrating its 50th anniversary of its founding in 1993 in San Francisco, because that's where it was chartered. And the head of the UN came to Bishop Swing, Bill Swing, and said, can you organize an interfaith service to help celebrate the United Nations and its work on behalf of humanity? And Bishop Swing thought about it. He said, you know what? We should already be organized as religions, the way the UN organized 50 years ago to help collectively solve the problems of humanity. Why aren't the religions organized to help solve the problems of humanity? The only thing we're doing together is talking to each other about our different opinions and beliefs and traditions. Not a bad thing, but he called that interreligious conversation an interminable conversation, and it didn't have enough action behind it, enough force, enough spirit. And he was moved by the Spirit to make this happen. Let's get all the religions together, not to talk about their faith and their differences. Same room. Been there, done that. Let's get them together to do stuff to solve the problems of the earth. So he did what everybody does when they're organizing a global movement. They find the head people. Went to see the Dalai Lama, went to see Mother Teresa, went to see the Grand Mufti. He said, I want to get all the religions together to solve the world's problems. Can you help? Can you throw some resources this way? And he found out every big shot he talked to was already too busy doing their own thing to divert their attention to his big idea. But the Holy Spirit kept inspiring him, and he said, you're right, you're busy, but your people are not busy enough. I'm going to find the people at the grassroots level and see if they will come together to collectively, across religious boundaries, solve some of these big global problems. So we had the idea, if I'm going to have a big organization of grassroots, we have to organize this. We need a staff, we need resources, we need a charter. I mean, that's how the UN did it, right? Where's the money going to come from? How are we going to? He said, well, I got a paid off house. He mortgaged his house, took out a loan to form what became the United Religions Initiative, 1993. And by 1999, they had their charter, they had their organization, they had a structure of circles of cooperation worldwide, different communities that came together, mixed groups of faith communities to work on specific local problems, all connected to each other organically. And in 1999, when the World Parliament of Religion was meeting at Cape Town, he was already an established enough religious leader to be invited to be there in the procession of religious leaders that was scheduled for the opening of the World Parliament of Religion. There was just one problem. Cape Town had experienced a bomb threat against this meeting of world religions, because apparently even in 1999, there were groups of people, hate groups, that were against the idea of religions meeting, especially together. So some of the people in the procession were kind of nervous, especially when the procession started, and there were demonstrators on both sides of the street with signs yelling ugly things. And one of Bishop Swing's friends tells this story about how Bishop Swing was at the end of the line, and there were some women dressed in black with nasty signs who were targeting religious leaders, come up and spit in their faces. And their end of the procession was getting close to a couple of these women. Two women in particular had singled out Bishop Swing, and his friend was like trying to pull him away. And Bishop Swing started to go closer to those women. When he got close enough, he reached out his hand and he said, "Hi, I'm Bill. I'm Bill from San Francisco, and I'm so happy. I'm a guest in your country. I'm so happy to meet you. I'm so happy to have this occasion to meet you. It's really special to me." And the woman holding the sign, his friend said her eyes got wide. She put her sign behind her back. And she stepped back a little bit, and Bill said, "No, really, I'm just, introduce me to your friend who was like, you know, you're supposed to spit in his face." And they both just kind of melted under his willingness to connect with them person to person. And in the end, the first woman laid down her sign and bowed to Bishop Swing. And he said to his friend when he got back in the line, "See, I told you the solution to world peace among the religions is friendship, relationship." That's what the Holy Spirit told Bill Swing. He said, you don't have to have the plan. You just have to have the willingness to be moved by that spirit. It's going to take you places that you can't predict. It's going to ask you to give your energy and your resources. It's going to ask you to be braver than you had planned to be, but it's going to be great. Bill Swift is 85 years old today. Not his birthday, but he's 85 years this year. And he's still vigorous. He's still got his sails up for the Holy Spirit to take him to the next big inspired effort. He still has his faith and his capacity to lead and inspire others. I saw him on a Zoom call just the other day, and I was like, wow, this church has a lot of people in their 80s who are still alive, who still have the Holy Spirit, who are still showing up, giving their gifts. We heard, I don't know how old you are, Dennis. Maybe you're not 80 yet, but a lot of you would qualify. I'm inspired by the 80-somethings and the 90-somethings, not to mention the 70-somethings and even the 60-somethings in this congregation. You're not dead yet. You're not giving up. You're not dry. You're not without the Spirit. You have all the basic ingredients for life and new life already in place. You have the mud called resources, money. You have the organization. You even have the staff. Nobody here is going to have to mortgage their homes to follow through on the big ideas that you're getting from the vision of your designated future experiment. That's great. All we need to mix our resources and our organization with that spark of the Spirit. Thomas calls it the oomph, the breath, the power, the fire of God that makes all things new. That's what you got going for you. The Spirit and the gifts are yours. All the elements for a new life, for recreation, for joy, and seeing the vision unfold here in new ways are among us now. The amazing grace of inspiration is yours as well. Amen.